Thanks very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Guzman, for that very kind introduction. I'd like to start by thanking Paloma Lopez Garcia for organising such a fantastic conference. I particularly enjoyed the session yesterday morning, particularly with the junior researchers here at the ECB who are doing such good stuff. And it's been lovely to meet old friends again and meet new people. So what I'd like to do today is say something about AI and productivity. And I'm going to use a title a little bit similar to what Christina McElroy used yesterday, which is a general purpose technology approach. I'm going to try to do something a bit different to the kind of papers that we heard yesterday morning and the kind of papers that are in the literature. And I will explain the subtitle of this in a little bit. The OECD have recently put together a terrific survey paper by Peter Gall, who is here, and his colleagues. And as you can see, there is a wide range of potential estimates of the effect of AI on labour productivity. So don't bother with the particular numbers here. Just understand that in this histogram, some estimates of the AI effect of productivity are very high over on the far left. Some are much lower. Darren Acemoglu's estimate of 0.06% on TFP was mentioned before, and the OECD have an estimate which is in the red there. So let's see if we can get a handle on understanding where these estimates come from. So they come from something called the task-based approach. So there's some words and there are some equations here. I'm going to explain what the equations are in just a second. So here's the key assumption, as it says on the slide, that AI is going to reduce the costs of labour on certain tasks, labour-saving technical change, and that gives you an implied cost reduction. So to those of you who are not economists, you can think of total factor productivity, which is a mysterious concept to non-economists, as a cost reduction. So where do you get the cost reduction? I've tried to label the terms here. The first thing you do, as it says, so I'm now going through the terms on the right, is you take the wage share of all the tasks which are exposed to AI. And the second thing you do, that's the Greek letter phi, is you take the share of those tasks which could potentially be replaced over a period of Y years. Y turns out to be 10. And the third thing you do is you assume some cost saving on those tasks. And the final thing you do is you divide it by the number of years it's going to take in order to give you some annual number. And if the tasks improve labour productivity, then you multiply that on the left-hand side there by the labour share. Again, for the non-economists, that tells you the percentage change in cost reduction per worker. Multiply that by the share of labour is a way of then telling you what the output consequences of that are going to be. So here are some typical numbers. The share of labour is 0.5. The estimated share of tasks from these complicated analyses that people do of tasks is 0.2. That is to say 20% of wages are in occupations potentially exposed to AI. The 23% of those tasks might be automated. 27% is an estimate of the cost savings, and that'll take 10 years. That's a tenth. So all of that gives you a number, this very small number in the case of Acemoglu, of 0.06% per year. Notice, as the OECD do, that you can double that estimate straight away by assuming that these benefits accrue to both labour and capital, because then you don't have to multiply it by the 0.5, which is on the outside of that very big bracket. So I wouldn't say it's quite easy to get big numbers and small numbers, but by assuming all these different numbers, that's the source of these very different estimates. So we're going to try to do something a little bit different, but keep that in mind, and I'll come back to this as a way of trying to interpret what it is that we're doing. We asked the following question. What if artificial intelligence is something that economists call a GPT? Now, GPT, now in the words of ChatGPT, which I'll explain in a second, is of course not helpful to non-economists. A GPT is a general purpose technology, and the definition is up on the screen there for you due to two very famous economists, Bresnan and Trachtenberg. Characterizes, it says here, maybe I'll read it out, forgive me, the potential for pervasive use in a wide range of sectors. As it evolves and advances, it brings about and fosters generalized productivity gains. Let's go straight to an example, which is a famous example in economics by a very famous economist who's passed away a while ago, called Zvi Grillakes, who talked about hybrid corn. And I must say, when I first did this, I thought, oh, hybrid corn, that's just a type of corn. And it isn't a type of corn. That's the important thing to understand. What hybrid corn is an amazing invention in kind of the 1920s, which is a way of blending together different strains of corn according to the local environment, if you're in a dry area or a windy area or whatever it might be. So it's an invention, as it says on the screen there, essentially of a method of inventing. Okay, that's what's clever about hybrid corn in that respect. And there are lots of examples, well, not lots of examples because they come rather rarely, but here are some general examples of what economists think of as general purpose technology: steam, electricity, semiconductors. So these are things which can be applied in lots of places and can help the process of invention. I should say Darren Acemoglu, in his very well-cited paper, which a lot of people have talked about, expressly rules this out. He says he's not going to discuss how AI has revolutionized effects by changing the process of science. I'm going to go exactly in the opposite direction and try to say what happens if AI improves science. Okay, so I hope everybody's with me on what we're doing. In order to do that, we need to go back 300 years and look at steam. Now, steam power was, of course, the artificial intelligence of its time. Here's James Watt's steam engine in the 1790s. Christina McElleron showed the Corliss steam engine in the 1840s, so half a century later. That was an even more efficient steam engine, 30% less fuel, 30% more power. Here's the first steam-powered flour mill in London in the 1790s. Here's a steam-powered ship which took you across the Atlantic. That was an amazing achievement. And Stephenson's rocket is the first railway line, as well. So steam was very much the AI of its time. And I'd like to spend a bit of time just trying to go through how it is that we think about steam, and then I'm going to apply that to AI. Now, how do we do this? So here's a picture of Nick Crafts, a very famous economic historian who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, but I know a great friend and colleague to many people in this room. How are we going to think about steam? We're going to try to put some numbers on all of this, because I'm going to try and put some numbers on AI. So apologies for the equations, but as I say, we're going to put some numbers on this. So there are going to be two sectors in this economy. The first sector is going to be producing tangible goods, and the second sector is going to be producing consumption goods. Let's go to the second sector. So you can think of the second sector as producing railway services, so transport services. So think of that. So that's the bottom equation says the change in the production of transport services, of railway services, it corresponds to the increase in the amount of labour. That's DLC times the share of labour. So that tells you the percentage change in railway services from employing more people working on the railways. And then, and this is the important term, the increase in capital in the railways times the share of capital, and that tells you something about the increase in transport services you get from employing more capital. So again, for the non-economists in the room, what's all this share and this weird PK stuff? Think of it this way. The return on capital tells you something about the extra money you're going to make if you install some capital. So think of that middle thing in the bottom there as essentially telling you if I install more railways at a certain rate of return on capital, I'm going to sell more passenger tickets and I'm going to make more money. So you can think of that middle term as essentially describing all of that. The upstream sector is, by contrast, the production of steam engines, and that tells you that the new steam engines you're going to get out are going to depend upon the extra labour you employ in steam engines, the extra capital you employ in steam engines. And here's the important term on the right, that DA, that tells you something about the productivity of steam engine production, and that's the thing that Watt and Bolton and Corliss and all these people improved enormously. They improved that technology. So think then of that upstream sector as being the production of steam engines. Think of the downstream sector as the use of steam engines, in particular railways. I've got coal mines there, as you might know, and this is important. In Germany, coal mines flood with water, and inventing a steam engine, you can pump the water out of a coal mine very efficiently, and that revolutionizes coal mining as well. All right, so labour productivity growth in the whole economy then is going to be this. The top equation tells you the change in labour productivity growth is going to come from two things. It's going to come from technical progress in the upstream sector and the downstream sector, And it's going to come from the amount of capital being used as a whole and the amount of labour that's being used as a whole as well. And that's all expressed in terms of the capital to labour ratio, both in the steam sector and in the consumption sector. So an application of that is on the very bottom. The very bottom tells you then the following. It says, how much extra productivity growth is the economy going to get from steam? And it's going to get it from two sources. The first source is that first equation there, which says, if the economy is producing a load of steam engines, and there's lots of technical progress and discovery in the production of steam engines, that's going to boost productivity growth. So it's going to be the productivity of steam engine production times the share PII of production of steam engines. So that tells you how important the production sector of steam engines is going to be. The bottom equation tells you about the use. If the economy is installing lots of steam engines in railways, in coal mines, then they're going to get extra productivity growth from the fact that now workers on railways and workers in coal mines can use all these steam engines. So the top bit is called TFP, total factor productivity, as it says in steam production, and the bottom bit is sort of steam capital deepening, as say the extra capital that workers have comprising of these fantastic new machines. Now, that then leads to the following question: why is the impact of GPTs so small when they are so productive? So again, for the non-economists in the room, here's a stylized fact about the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was a sequence of these amazing inventions, steam, electricity, things like that. Yet, productivity growth was amazingly slow during the Industrial Revolution. In fact, productivity growth in the Industrial Revolution was about the same productivity growth that we've got now, which is terrifying to say. And so the puzzle in economic history is, as it says on the slide here, fantastic inventions. Why was productivity growth so slow? And this slide attempts to tell you the answer. So steam total factor productivity growth, our best estimates of how efficient it was getting in steam production, was growing about 3%. I'm going to switch gears slightly and go to the ICT revolution. Here are the early days, excuse me, of the ICT revolution in the 1970s. Their total factor productivity growth is going at 22%. So you can think of that as being Moore's law. Okay, so again, amazing pace of productivity growth by these general purpose technologies. What about the use of this? Let's go to the steam era in 1760 to 1830. Capital deepening was going on at 4%. What does that mean? That means that economies were re-equipping and spreading steam engines throughout the economy. Steam railways, steam coal mines, steam-powered factories, right? So workers had more and more capital to deal with. To get you some modern-day measure of that, what was ICT? ICT capital deepening over that time was 13%. Okay? If you think back a long, long way, we never had a computer on our desks. We now have bazillions of computers on our desks. We throw away computers without worrying about it. Think of that as being capital deepening that way. So you've got these enormous productivity gains, and as I say, mysteriously, the puzzle is why is the impact so small? And the answer, as you can see from a mathematical point of view, is you've got to multiply these productivity gains by the shares in production of the various constituent parts of the economy. You've got to multiply the productivity gain upstream by the amount of steam production which is going on in the economy. You've got to multiply the productivity gain downstream by what you're paying for all these various steam engines. So here's the key bit. When you first start steam production, there isn't any steam production before, and there aren't any steam engines. So those shares are extremely small. Okay, let's just see some numbers there. So there's the same numbers you've just seen. Let me animate in the numbers here. So to give you a sense of this, this left-hand box tells you for steam, during 1760 to 1830, so that's 70 years, the steam producing sector was only 1% of GDP. In other words, you had a fantastically technologically progressive sector, but it was only a small part of GDP. The ICT revolution, what was the share of production of software and hardware? It's only 1.5% of GDP at that time. So you can see that even though you had a lot of productivity growth in those production sectors, because you were multiplying it by a small number, you got a small overall effect. Let's go downstream. The share of steam payments to steam engines in GDP Even, as I say, on average, 1760 to 1830 was 0.2%, right? Wasn't even a percent of GDP. The ICT share actually was 4.2%, so relative to steam was much higher. So what does that give you? As it says up on the slide there, the contribution of steam to productivity was amazingly small, 0.02%. Again, because you had these very small shares. Interestingly, the contribution of ICT to productivity in the context of steam is amazingly large. So I was discussing this yesterday with Bernhard. There's a famous Solow paradox where Solow said you can see productivity everywhere. You can see computers everywhere, sorry, except in the productivity statistics. And the answer is once we'd measured all this stuff correctly, we actually got these gigantic numbers, or more accurately, 0.67 is a gigantic number in the context of previous industrial revolutions. Okay, so it's the interaction then of the productivity of these new technologies and their share in production. Hold that thought as we go to AI. Now, Juan Jimenez, in his discussion yesterday, stressed that it would be a good idea to have a sort of slightly deeper sense of what AI actually is before we then start throwing it into production functions and all that kind of thing. So with apologies to those of you who are AI experts, here's how an economist amateur like me thinks about AI. So what is AI? In a sense, AI is not new. We've already had a bit of AI. And the first generation of AI, I'm going to use a very nice short paper by Alan, which is linked. Sorry, that link is that link working? Yeah, if you click on that link works. It's a very nice paper by Gary Allen, who describes the two generations of AI. The first generation of AI he describes as handcrafted knowledge AI. Let's go to an example. So here's a picture of Garry Kasparov, the world chess champion at the time in the 1990s, who famously lost to that opponent on the left-hand side there, that opponent not being a human being, that opponent was a computer, which was the IBM Deep Blue. Now, you don't lose to a computer, you lose to the software, obviously, in the computer. And what was the software that was developed then? The software was this. Those clever software programmers at IBM programmed in the rules of all the chess moves, and then they talked to chess grandmasters and grandmistresses, whatever the gender-neutral term of chess grandmaster. I'm getting myself into trouble here. Experts in chess. They talked to experts in chess and figured out what all the best moves were and managed to defeat Kasparov. So here's the key point. The miracle is not that the machine managed to defeat Kasparov, because the machine can think infinitely, and Kasparov, needs a cup of tea after a while, right? The miracle is not that. The miracle is that the programmers managed by hand to program in all the rules, which are pretty complicated, and then program in some sort of decision rules about if the opponent does this, Kasparov does this, then the machine should do that. That was the miracle bit. So again, it's the handcrafted knowledge AI, which is the way to think about the first bit of it. So that's the first bit of AI. And I'm going to adopt Alan's terrific diagram, or diagram which I found very helpful, in the following way. In a minute, I'm going to show the second wave of AI, but just to fix ideas, the first wave of AI, as I say, is you have the human program rules at the top. That gives you what I've called traditional software. You then put the input data in on the left, so that's the move of your opponent. That gives you some output, namely the best responsive output. Okay, so that's the old AI. Let's do new AI, and hence the title. And excuse me, the subtitle of this program, of this slide. Okay, now here's a paper from Mathematical Problems in Engineering. I come from Imperial College, and Imperial College in London is an engineering and science college. Here is a frontier problem in mathematical engineering and computer science. It is getting the computer to recognize animals. Now, if you've been through the airport, you know the computer recognizes your face. That turns out to be a relatively easy problem, my colleagues tell me, in computer science. Recognizing animals is really hard. Why is it really hard? Well, animals look the same, they've got fur, the fur changes different colors, all that kind of thing. So here's a picture of a computer problem, namely trying to recognize all these different animals, and this is sheep, cows, and all of that. This turns out to be important in animal husbandry because the shepherds and the farmers want to identify the most sort of fertile sheep who are, giving birth to the best quality cows and sheep, and on all that kind of thing. Okay, now that facial recognition is just too hard for humans, and it's too hard for handmade software. So, for example, if you're in Australia and New Zealand, herds of sheep might be 30,000 sheep. Right? No human being is ever going to be able to recognize 30,000 sheep, and even a skilled shepherd is not going to be able to recognize 30,000 sheep and understand the parents of the sheep and the children and all that kind of thing. However, what about machines? So machines can do this. So how does machine learning AI do it? So the first thing they do is you give the computer some pictures. So we've heard a little bit about that in the nice presentation we had yesterday about the environment. Pictures, which as I understand it is called unstructured data. And what machine learning is you train the software on this subset of pictures. So you don't give the pictures of all the sheep, you give a subset of pictures and you train the data. And what does the computer do? The computer works out shapes and distances between features and ears and all that kind of thing. And then the final step is it uses the trained software to recognize all the pictures. So so I hope that's summarized then in the second half of this Allen diagram. So again, the top bit of the Allen diagram is the handcrafted AI. This second bit is different. So let's have a look at the little sort of dotted bit at the beginning. So again, you give the training data to the computer. You have an algorithm where it learns from the training data. Once it's trained it, so the trained AI model, that then gives you in red the AI software. Okay? Then you feed in the input data, in this case, pictures of your sheep, and you get an output. So again, to contrast, knowledge up at the top there in the first part of this is human experts, so that's the chess experts. Knowledge downstream is by a learning algorithm applied to a training data set. So that's the very different sort of type of software that, as I understand it, is being produced by AI. A quick digression. Lots of people say, what is this chat GPT? GPT, again, to economists, is general purpose technology. It's this. First of all, the G stands for generative AI. So generative AI generates new responses and new content. P stands for pre-trained. So as we've just seen, you've trained it on the data. You trained it on the data looking at sheep. And the T stands for transformer. Transformer is a type of neural network machine learning method. So again, it all refers to that sort of second part of it. Okay, so that's, as I say, my understanding of this translated into economic terms. And what you can see then from this diagram is that one way of thinking about the machine learning and AI is it's a software revolution. Right? We've gone from the handcrafted software to much better software. So now we need to ask, where is software in GDP? How do we economists think about software? And thankfully, owing to lots of work by statistical agencies, we've got a reasonably, I think, satisfactory way of thinking about it. Let's remind ourselves what the investment types are when we measure GDP, y equals C plus I plus G, so this is the I bit in all of that. The investment types are tangible, buildings, vehicles, computers, non-computer plant machinery, and intangible. What are the intangible investments? Little picture there for you on the right. They are software and databases, R&D, and artistic originals. So if we're going to think about AI as being a new piece of software or a new way of generating more software, we know how to fit this into the national accounts because we're measuring software as an investment in the national accounts. So again, hold that thought slightly and let me go back to the task analysis that I was talking about earlier on. Now, not everybody uses these, and again, yesterday morning at the session that Paloma organised, there were a whole lot of nice papers which use different techniques. But one technique which a lot of people do use is due to Elandrew et al., and I've got the exact reference there. What measures do? They do this. They have two measures of the extent to which labour is exposed to AI. Do you remember on that equation at the very beginning, there was one of the measures was the extent to which there's an exposure to AI. The first measure is a sort of narrow measure, which is using large language models Could you decrease the time required to complete the activity by at least 50%? That turns out to be a very small number. That's saying literally right now, how many people can we replace? The much bigger number, which it is that people use, so this is the 40-30%, is the exposure in the following way. And the question is this: can additional software be developed on top of the large language model that could reduce the time it takes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So you see where I'm going on all of this. One way to think about this is that E2 is sort of an equivalent of let's give the workers some steam engines to work with. In a sense, it's software capital deepening, right? That's one way, I think, of what it is that this question is sort of trying to pick up. So how are we going to interpret AI in this language? A narrow interpretation is to say it's a massive improvement in the production of software, and then we're then, as an economy, that software is then going to cascade and workers are going to be able to use lots of software, same with Steam. So, as it says here, a narrow interpretation is its total factor productivity growth in software writing. The use of it will be software capital deepening. But of course, maybe artificial intelligence is much broader than that. Here's a picture from McKinsey. I'm sorry this has come out a little bit small. On the top right are the business functions that McKinsey, and they're pretty close to business, the business functions that McKinsey think that AI might help. Let me read some of them out. They are software engineering on the top right, but there are also other business functions broader than that. Sales on the top left, marketing, product R&D, and customer operations. And all of these, I think, those types of business functions fit in with the emerging AI literature on, for example, the use by call center operatives of AI. So you phone in to get some instructions, the call center person has got their headphones and they're speaking to you, but they've also got a screen in front of them with AI making suggestions for how they're going to answer your questions. Okay, so you can think of that as being marketing, customer operations, things like that, broader than just software. So the other point, of course, is that AI uses data. Remember all that stuff on the training data. So there might be TFP and deepening in data. It helps with R&D and creativity. Forgive me, these are very British examples. I spend lots of time in Britain talking to scientists who are, well, maybe we could talk about it in the Q&A. They're very optimistic about the use of AI in the process of science discovery. Think of new drugs. I spend also time in Britain talking about there's a very thriving special effects Hollywood, special effects movies industry. So if you've ever seen, you and the family have ever seen Harry Potter, all of those special effects are all done in the UK. Those special effects companies are very optimistic about AI helping them to do even better special effects. So it helps with R&D and creativity, as I've mentioned about McKinsey. So maybe it might be a bit broader than just software. Okay. So now, if you'll forgive me, we've just got to go back to a bit of maths and I'll try and do some numbers. So I've now got 3 sectors here, but I hope you can see where I'm going. The bottom sector is the consumption sector, so that's railways or product services when we phone up and try to get some after-sales service. The middle sector is tangibles. We did that a moment ago before. The top sector is the production of intangibles. So intangible goods would be things like software, artistic originals, all the creativity stuff, new formulae for drugs, all the sort of progress of science stuff. Okay, so same set of equations there. The production, as it says on the left, on the right-hand side, of intangible capital, tangible capital, and then their use. And so what might the contribution be of AI? So let me walk you through this on the assumption that AI is just software and AI is robots. There's a bit of discussion yesterday about robots. I don't think that's a big part of AI, but people do count AI as robots. I must say, my computer scientist friends get very offended when they say AI is robots. It has nothing to do with robots, but somehow in economics, we've settled upon that standard. So what's it going to be? The extra output, the extra productivity you'll get from AI, let's go to the top line. It's going to be TFP growth in the production of software and data and in the production of robots, just like Steam. And then it's going to be the use of robots. That's the middle bit. You're going to give workers more robots to use. And then it's going to be the use of software. That's the lower bit. You're going to give workers more software to use. So again, exactly like Steam. If we want to just narrow it down to just software and data, it would be the production and software and data, and then the use downstream of that as well. Or more broad, if we wanted to broaden it out, it would be productivity growth in all the range of intangible business functions, creativity, software, R&D, all that kind of thing, and then the use of that improved, those improved intangible assets, the use of better drugs, the use of improved answering services and customer relations and all that kind of thing. Right, now, as promised, let's just try and put some numbers on this and see where we get to. What I'm going to do to illustrate this is use some recent data on software. I'm going to stop because the screen I can see is showing an advertisement for mousse and yogurt. So I don't know what people are seeing at home, but just to let you know, if that's a screen I can see. Fantastic German dishwashers now, amazing. Brilliant. Now that's gone off. Okay, right. So let's do an illustration. Let's go to the software industry. And let's look at software and sort of try to bring this to life a little bit with some numbers here. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to look at the American software industry. We've got data for Europe as well. Let me just do America for the moment, with apologies to the European audience. I'm going to look pre-2015 and 2015 to 2019. So I'm just going to take a short period. The 2015 era is kind of interesting, I think, because that was when the breakthrough in facial recognition came. So the number on the left-hand side, red is the humans and black is the computer. So by about 2015, the computer was better than humans at facial recognition. And then also on the right, there was a lot more use of AI in terms of open source software. I think of this sort of 2015 to 2019 era as a kind of big data era. Okay, if Paloma, you were organizing a conference back then, it would have been on big data because nobody had quite heard of AI, if you sort of see what I mean. So let's see what those numbers say. And I'm going to use all these shares and all that kind of thing as I did before. Okay, so to give you some sense of this, 2010 to 2014, TFP growth in software, as best we can measure it, was 2.7%, and the share of software was around 4%. So if you remember the Steam numbers, that 4% is a ginormous number relative to Steam, right? It took a century to get Steam up to a number. It never even reached 4%. So the contribution is 0.11. In 2015 to 2019, TFP went up by about 0.5 percentage point. The share went up by a little bit, and the contribution therefore went up. So that's the upstream improvement that there's been just in that limited period. Okay? Before it was contributing 0.11, now contributing 0.15. Let's go to the downstream and do the software capital deepening. Software capital deepening in the earlier period was going on at around 5%, so that's a lot of extra software that you and I are using, but that makes sense, right? We're using new software and so forth all the time. The share is about 3%, the contribution is 0.17. Capital deepening accelerated in the big data era, 2015 to 2019. The share was about the same, the contribution was about 0.25. Okay, so just to give you some sense of all of those various numbers. So here's a summary then. That gain in that earlier period was about 0.5 percentage point on TFP, about 1.5 percentage points on TFP, and that was a gain then of 0.12% per annum. Okay, so that's just software, just in this early period when we were using big data. Okay, so what about the future TFP gains? Well, again, if I go to the OECD paper by Filippini, Peter Gallo sitting over there, as I mentioned, and Matthias Schief, the productivity gains in a number of these firms who are adopting these things are absolutely enormous, right? There's 30, 40, 50, 60%. So those are potential gigantic numbers from Gen AI. It's not clear whether they're TFP. These are just the adopting firms, as the OECD are very careful to say how long this might take. It might go across many business functions, so we're not sure about all of that. But if we think about something even broader than this, let me just give you some sense of these numbers here. If we go to 2015 and 2019, I'm on the top right here, and we ask, what's the share of the intangibles producing sector, not just software, That's 14% is the share. You've got to net out exports and imports. That's slightly tricky. But the IT sector, as I say, is about 5%. The intangible sector is 14%. So do you remember I said you've got to multiply the share by the productivity? If AI affects all the intangibles, then we really are into some very big numbers, because we're going to be multiplying that by an already big sector. And again, let me repeat what I said before. The thing about steam is steam was brand new. Before we had horses and we had water. So the steam share was very small. Whereas we've already got a lot of software. You have it on your machines, and now you have AI on your machines as well when you're doing Google and this, that, and the other. So that we're not starting from a zero share. We're starting from a much bigger share. I think that's the sort of key point that I want to make. Similarly, with capital deepening, again, the share of intangibles is 25% intangibles. There's a lot of intangible capital around. The share just of software is 4%. So again, if it's a lot of capital deepening of all the intangibles, we could have some big numbers. Okay, let me then get to one more thing with apologies for a little bit too much algebra, which is we've also worked out a steady state model which says this. Suppose you've got all this productivity going on in the upstream, let's call it the software sector or the intangible sector. That's going to produce capital deepening, as I've just said. Work that through a steady state kind of model and work out the induced extra capital from that extra productivity. How much extra productivity growth do you get? And the answer is given by that formula there. For those of you who are familiar with all of this, this says following the extra productivity growth is what? It's the share of the intangible investment times the comparative speed of productivity growth in intangibles relative to other sectors of the economy. That's the first term, that's the production term. And then the extra productivity from the deepening in capital depends upon that premium times the share of intangibles divided by the labour share. So I'm sorry if that was very obscure to non-economists. Again, you can get some fairly big numbers there. So let me stop in that case by summarising. What we've tried to do then is to investigate AI as an innovation in innovation itself. So it's a total factor productivity gain in the production, in our language, of intangibles, narrow intangibles, like software, broad intangibles, like those other business functions. The gains in STEAM and ICT were very small at the start because the asset base was small. I think our best guess is that those gains are going to be higher because, as I've mentioned before, the asset base is much higher. So again, to repeat that, the STEAM income share was below 1% of GDP for 60 years. Right? The software income share, and we've had software now for a fair time, is already up at 4%. Right? So that's pretty enormous. The intangible income share is around 25%, so there's big numbers. A very rough estimate of the big data era gives you gains, again, these are on American data, of about 0.2 percentage points. And what then would be the TFP gains if you had even bigger TFP? And they sort of vary a little bit. So if you thought that we had a 2% bonus in TFP, then the rise in productivity, the rise in TFP overall might be between 0.1 and 0.2, long-run productivity working through the model, 0.3 and 0.6. If you thought that we're going to get a 5% gain in the intangible sector, then, and it's a broad gain in all the intangibles, then you might get a rise in TFP of between 0.3 and 0.5. Long-run labour productivity growth might even go up by 1.5%. Those are very, very big numbers. So I'm going to give you then, somewhat recklessly, a conservative estimate of the near-term labour productivity gains. Twice the big data gains would be 0.24. Okay, so that's sort of in the middle of these more medium-run gains from a combination of TFP being fairly broad in all the intangibles and those extra bits of TFP. One last thing, if I may, and then I promise I will stop, which is this. Of course, as was raised yesterday at the ECB session, the statistical agencies have got to measure all of this lot. If we're producing more steam engines, the statistical agencies can measure steam engines because you can go and ask firms what the horsepower of their steam engines is. If we're producing improved telephone answering services, It's not quite clear how we measure all of that. If we're producing improved health services, not quite clear how we measure all of that as well. So I think my provisional conclusion is potentially we're sitting on top of big AI gains, but we may not notice them because they may not be measured very well owing to the concentration of those gains in the hard-to-measure areas. At that point, Paloma Guzman, I'll stop. Thank you all very much indeed. Thanks. I'm happy to take some questions. I see Paloma with her hand up.
So thank you very, very much, Jonathan. I mean, this was a great start of the second day. So my question is the following. So all these, I think it was really interesting that you said that everything hinges really on the share of the economy that is really affected. And sometimes we're too narrow, no, in defining what is this share. But the point is, these calculations are assuming that all the parts of the economy that can be improved for, because of artificial intelligence are going to be improved. So in a best case scenario, in terms of adoption. But there are going to be many workers and many firms that even if in this best case scenario, they could benefit from AI, they are not going to do that. So my question to you is, how can we maximize the adoption? So it's really all these intangible base of the economy that is going to benefit in all countries. I mean, what is the thing that we have to do from the policy sphere to really make sure that all this intangible share of the economy can benefit from AI? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much. Paloma, let me try just briefly to answer that. So to the extent that this is intangible capital deepening, you're quite right. Firms can choose to do it or they can choose not to do it. And indeed, across different countries, we see very different intangible capital deepening. So part of the reason I think why there's a feeling about US exceptionalism is forget about all the experimental numbers. If you just look at the national accounts numbers and ask how much is the US investing in intangible assets, software, artistic originals, books and movies, and R&D, the US economy is investing vastly more and has been doing since the pandemic. Europe is stuck, I'm afraid, at a rather low level. So I think, Paloma, the way I think about your question is, another way of asking that question is, why is it that there's different amounts of intangible investment invested across different countries? And those are the types of reasons that we heard yesterday from Christine Lagarde. So, for example, advantageous financing and venture capital in the US, disadvantageous regulation and lack of trade and so forth in Europe. Public support for science is it was relatively high in the US, it's now being cut back. So it's and the formation of clusters would be the other thing that I would say as well. So that's all around planning policy. So I'd very much echo, as I say, what Christine Lagarde was saying yesterday, which is that if we Europe, I include the UK in that if you'll forgive me, if we Europe want to take advantage of AI, the language of intangible investment says we need to take advantage of intangible investment, so we need the type of structural reforms which will encourage intangible investment. Please.
So yesterday we have heard a lot about the J-curve effect.
Yeah.
Do you have a take on this too? Because it didn't come up in your presentation today. And secondly, so when you talk about this larger share of software, it's all about adoption and diffusion. So is this just a different language to talk about diffusion? Is way faster compared to the steam engine in this time around?
Yeah, thanks for that. So the J-curve effect, if you don't know what the J-curve effect is this. When all this fantastic AI comes along, there has to be accompanying investment by firms into new business processes and new ways of managing and new marketing methods and all that kind of thing. If we don't measure that investment in those new business processes, those sort of co-investments, then it looks like the economy's kind of tanking for a bit because it's spending all this stuff and not getting anything for it. Well, that's because we're not measuring it. Then when we start measuring it, then the economy comes back up again. So roughly, that's what the J-curve is. I think this intangible investment is moving very quickly, actually. So I think the bottom line to that is that these J-curve effects I just don't think are very large. That there's fast depreciation rates going on with all of this. Sorry, that's a sort of slightly techie answer. But so there are some J-curve effects in here, but they turn out to be rather small relative to the sort of positive effects. That's the first thing. On the adoption and diffusion, yes, I think we are just saying, so that we're doing kind of a growth accounting analysis. I think of the task research corpus as being task accounting. And I think it sort of comes to the same thing, actually, in the sense that, as I tried to show, what I think the task accounting is getting at is getting at the implementation of extra software and extra business processes. And that's exactly what we're doing in growth accounting, but we're just calling it something different. I do think what's interesting, so I'm not trying to attack the task-based analysis. I think what I'm trying to do is, and I've talked about this with OECD colleagues, is I'm trying to triangulate this with a task-based analysis. And I think we end up getting to rather similar answers because we can calibrate what we're doing on previous episodes, as you've just seen, the big data era, for example. Then I think this is an additional, I hope of some interest, calculation to help to try to validate and get some central estimate of what the future effects might be. Bernard, oh, sorry, you first and then Bernard.
Thank you so much for your enlightening speech, Professor. Is it turned off now? No, it is. Thank you very much. Professor Haskel, thank you very much for your enlightening speech. I'm monitoring questions from the online audience.
Oh, great.
And we have a question from Robert Farago. And he's asking if you could elaborate, please, a bit more on how your estimates for total productivity compare with those that you showed in the earlier slides, the range of estimates that you showed in earlier slides. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. Could I ask if we could go back to the slide deck, if that would be okay? Then I can go back. I need to go to slide number 2, if I could ask the people very kindly. So I think in answer to Robert's question, thank you. That was the slide deck I showed before. You can see a wide range of estimates. It's probably too hard to see them at home. These are estimates from 2.5%, 3% on the left-hand side, to below 0.1% on the right-hand side. I think the bottom line is we are quite close to the estimates by the OECD, by Peter Galler, again mentioned, and his colleagues, which is the red bar there as well. Now we've got there, per the earlier discussion, we've got there in a slightly different route because we're doing the capital deepening and the upstream and the downstream and all of that. But again, to repeat, if I may, what I said in the earlier question, if you regard this as an attempt to sort of triangulate against what other people are doing, I think we're getting to some similar numbers, which would be around 0.2%, maybe a little bit higher. Thanks very much for the question. Bernard, I think you were next.
So, Bernard Winkler, ECB. I go back to our coffee discussion. In trying to see whether Darren Acemoglu or you are right, or which approach, what is it that we should look at in our evidence? So you said STEAM is the AI of its time, but STEAM and AI are very different kind of things. So what is the things which differentiate? And my question, so my line is, first, it's too early to tell in the national accounts, so it'll take probably decades and many revisions and measurement of intangibles to get that question right. And the other thing could be AI more in the virtual world than in the real world. I'm now thinking about the discussion we had before the Lehman crisis about productivity going up because of financial engineering, financial innovation, and all that. And that brings back Willem Buiter, James Tobin. There's useless finance, useful finance, and harmful finance. Could there be harmful AI, useless AI, and useful AI also affecting productivity? So that means distraction, the way we work, and doing things that we should not be doing, which is useless stuff. So that's a broader picture, but that really is to the heart of whether it's like a steam engine, which is real things, which is, you know, production, versus something which is much more in the virtual world? Just to think about it. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question. We had a very nice discussion over coffee. So 2 quick answers on that, because I don't want to take us beyond time. One is, I think the lesson from the ICT revolution was the measurement of it was absolutely crucial. So getting the deflators right, getting quality adjustment and all that kind of thing. And I think there are big measurement challenges there, not least because if McKinsey are right, and AI is going to improve or affect, I should say, many business functions. As I say, those business functions like quality of service turn out to be very difficult to measure. So renewed efforts by the statistical authorities are going to be important there. That's one thing. Second thing is, you're quite right that there was lots of innovation which in turn out, financial innovation or like, turned out to be not very helpful innovation. This is going to be an anecdote, so forgive me. I have to say that in conversations with my Imperial College scientist colleagues, they are very optimistic about AI and the progress of science, speeding the progress of science in a way that I hadn't seen before in conversations around big data and all of that. So for example, the biologists have got AI generating new hypotheses which affect, which explain biological reasons. The pharmaceutical people are using AI to combine drugs in various ways so that, for example, you could combine already invented old drugs to treat new diseases, right? There are lots of different combinations you could do it. The nuclear fission people talk a lot about using AI to help with the engineering problems around improving nuclear energy. The robotic surgery, there's a large robotic surgery element at Imperial College. AI is really helping them with all of that. So when a camera goes inside you, when the robot's doing the surgery, the visual recognition, I was talking about the sheep, the visual recognition that the camera can now have when it goes inside you to look for abnormalities and all that kind of thing. AI is really powering those sort of things. So forgive me, maybe I'm talking my own Imperial College book, but I think we should take seriously, and I think this is the wedge between us and Darren Acemoglu, I think we should take seriously the possibility that AI will improve scientific discovery. And I think this methodology, which I've tried to explain, may be at least a first go at taking seriously that issue and trying to put some numbers on it. Please.
Thank you. Elijah Lingorski, Bulgarian National Bank. Professor Haskel, thank you from me as well. I hope the slides are distributed after the conference because the algebraic summary would be extremely useful to many researchers in applying the approach. If I may go a little bit back to Marcus's question with regard to the J-curve, in trying to isolate the effect of AI in growth and changes in total factor productivity, do you think that we may actually have a J-curve type problem there because it may take us a little bit of time to adjust the weights on labor and capital accordingly in order to be more accurate in how we estimate and measure what's the effect of AI just on the TFP part of the growth?
Yeah, thanks very much. So I think there are at least 2 things going on here. One is, if we're going to get at the J-curve effects, if the J-curve effects require co-investment in broader business processes, which we don't normally measure as investment because we just measure a series of narrow intangible investments as investment, then we're going to miss all of that. So that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is, as I was saying earlier on, we need to get the deflators right to understand improvements in quality of service, improvements in the quality of medicine, all those kinds of things. And if we don't get those right, then we'll get some J-curve type problems as well. My instinct would be to get the deflators right first, and then do the broadening. That's more, I think, of a second order problem in terms of picking all this up. I think I've got time for one more question, if that's all right. Paloma Guzman, just at the end.
Yeah, Bertrand Martens in Bruegel. A follow-up to an earlier question, good and bad AI and the difference between STEAM and AI. We've seen in digital services, digital platforms, for example, that a lot of the productivity gains are actually turned into consumer surplus, non-monetized consumer surplus, and that's not captured by your productivity statistics. And we see probably the same in AI now. The consumer's internal production function becomes more efficient, and that's very hard to capture in statistics. At the same time, we see on the production side of AI that most of these foundational models are basically big loss-making accounts for these big tech firms. And so they are selling far below cost at the moment. So there's, again, this loss is not captured in the productivity statistics. So how can we try to improve our measurements when we take this into account?
Yeah, thank you. I'm very sympathetic to that question, but I don't want to go beyond time, so apologies for a very quick answer. Yeah, super sympathetic to that question. Big job for the statistical agencies to do. There's another element of that, which is, again, going back to the diagram I showed with the training data. Of course, a lot of that training data may well be proprietorial to firms as well. So if they're using that internally, then there might be less spillovers to other firms as well. And the value of that we find much more difficult as a statistical community to measure what firms are doing internally than when they're buying in stuff. So apologies for a short answer to a good question, but again, I think that highlights the measurement challenges here. This thing is flashing red at me, so I feel I should stop. And thank you all very much.